Hello, welcome back to Miner Network. I'm with Greg Cochran, the Managing Director of Aurora Energy Metals. Greg, good to see you.
Peter, good to be here again and good to chat to you. We've got some exciting news on the way and we're making good progress, and there's been a good response in London to what we're up to.
Good. To kick things off before we go into the details, brief company overview.
Aurora Energy Metals holds one of the largest uranium deposits in the US. We brought it to market in the middle of this year. We listed in the middle of May, so it's been an intense 6 months. We're well funded. We raised $8 million at Aussie dollars at 20 cents, and we've got about $6 million left in the bank. A very supportive shareholder base, a really good shareholder structure, and we've got some fantastically supportive funds on the register as well, even at this relatively early stage of our development.
Good. Okay, well, I always ask as the next question is capital structure, so maybe you can run through that and how you've kept it tight, who's on the register.
The company prior to listing was a public unlisted entity, so we already had in excess of 1,000 shareholders, which made the listing somewhat easier, and also because we had this already fairly well-defined deposit. We attracted new capital, but what we saw is the minute that we listed, there was a large proportion of people that had sat on their holding that couldn't trade for 8 or 9 years. And so we saw people running for the exits because they have the right to invest in other things. We had 142 million shares on issue. We saw high turnovers. We rapidly ramped up. Within a few weeks, we were at 40 cents, so doubled. And then as those shares leaked out into the market, and as the overall pullback in equity markets, we're down trading at around about parity, just above parity. So we're fairly comfortable where we're at because we've resolved that issue, where we've cleaned up the structure, we've mopped up the unmarketable parcels as well. So we've got something that we believe is a manageable and a respectable shareholder structure. A lot of the Mitchell River Group people, which is the project generator that originally acquired the asset, funny enough from my old company, Uranium 1 in 2010, are also in there, and that's a sizable 30-odd% proportion. About 12% in mainstream funds, and then there's probably management of we're about 6 or 8%, 10% maybe. And then there are the next 10 or so on the list are all high net worth, serious investors that hold significant stakes between 0.5% and 2.5%. So it's a very supportive structure, although it'll probably come up in the discussion anyway. So, although many of them are kind of nudging me to get on with it in terms of the lithium. So that's where there's a bit of anxiousness.
No, we'll get on to that. Just what's the market cap at the moment, cash in the bank, burn rate, things like that?
Yeah. So we're trading at depending on the time of day, about sort of between 30 and 35 Aussie million dollars market cap. Still at $6 million in the bank. This current quarter has been quite expensive for us because we've had to mobilize a second rig that came available, and so that's almost doubled our intended drilling costs. So we kind of but it we've got a lot of benefit. Typically, though, we'd expect a burn rate of around about $1 million to maybe $1.25 million a quarter. But so we've got well funded for the current program leading up to the middle of next year at least.
And that's all Aussie dollars?
Yes, all Aussie dollars.
Brilliant. Okay. Let's go into the deposit. Geologically, what does this look like? And just tell us where it is.
We're in Southeast Oregon in the geological feature known as the McDermott Caldera, which is home to the two largest US lithium deposits. Thacker Pass, valued at well over $1 billion, and Jindalee, also a fellow Aussie listed company, and their market cap is in excess of $200 million. So very large, 1.3 billion tons, and I forget where Thacker Pass is at. Yeah. The funny thing about us, though, is we owe our existence to the discovery of a uranium deposit in the 1970s that was well drilled and well defined by Placer Amex, which is today part of Barrick. Well, it was, as I said earlier, acquired from Uranium 1 in 2010. Some work was done, and they drilled through what was seen as waste and overburden at the time to just check the uranium deposit and then update the resource to get it to 2012 JORC compliance. Post Fukushima, they delisted and left it there. And we're now revisiting this and saying, okay, we've gone back and we've assayed the overlying structure. And surprise, surprise, it's got lithium in it. So They are geologically discrete. I can't call the lithium an ore body because we don't have a resource yet, but they are clearly geologically discrete zones where the uranium is in the basement and just in the slightly weathered sort of volcanics, introduced likely by hydrothermal fluids coming up from a fault. And then you've got these lithium lake bed sediments that were deposited by erosion and into the crater lake over millions of years. And of course it evaporated, so now we've got those sediments on surface.
Okay, and what's the surface area of the license that you have, and how much of that, especially on the lithium side, I'm just trying to get an idea of how big these lakes might be.
That's really important, because whilst uranium is a small area, in aerial extent, the lithium, our current focus area is about 18 square kilometers. Jindalee from memory is about 25 square kilometers. So you say, okay, well, if our grades are the same, you would just do a simple sum and say, well, we're a percentage of 1.3 billion tons, assuming the same grades and assuming exploration success. That being said, we have another 20 odd square kilometers between ourselves and Jindalee. Most of that we've also staked,
okay,
but we're not even looking at that because we've got our hands full with our current area.
What's the actual depth of the lithium sediments that we're looking at?
Where the uranium deposit is located, there's an old stream that also ran through that, and so it eroded the sediments. And what you see is where the uranium is and where we know the lithium is, that's relatively thin sediments, which is not good for the lithium.
Yep.
Because you want nice thick sediments, whereas they 5, 10, 15, 20, at its deepest, I think 60 meters of cover. Okay. That's good from a uranium point of view, because when we start mining, we'll have almost no stripping ratio.
Yep.
But as you move into the deposit, you'll get more and more of the overlying sediments. So at most 60 meters, but the minute you go to the northeast, you're going into a fault zone with a downthrown block, and that's 200 meters thick. That's the big prize.
Right.
So going into that downthrown block, and then as you go back into the center of the crater, the volcanic crater, the sediments naturally thicken as well.
Okay.
We've got some insight into what's going on the other side of the fault line, because there was another junior company drilling in the 1970s, and we've acquired their data, their core logs. So there is no core left to assay, but they logged hectorite clays. Mm-hmm. And hectorite is the lithium-bearing clay. Yep. So we're encouraged that we're not exploring blind. We know, okay, it's there. It's just a matter of what's the grade and how far does it extend.
You're talking about the northern area where you think it could go down to 200 meters.
Yeah. Oh, it does. We have the geological information that attests to that.
And that's
fact, yes.
200 meters is the clay that
theoretically
the lithium will
the
be
lake bed sediments, of which there are clay layers that host hectorite.
And you host the majority of the licenses, or if not all the licenses in that area?
We've got all the claims in that area. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what about, and in the middle of the crater as well, you've got
the craters like that. We're at the northeastern end,
mm-hmm.
And so we stretch down somewhat. But remember, the crater in full extent is like 50 kilometers by 30 kilometers wide. So we're at the top end. Jindalee's on this side, mm-hmm. and then Thacker Pass is somewhat in the middle to the eastern.
So they're all within the same crater.
We're all within the same McDermott caldera.
Brilliant.
Crater, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Let's look at the uranium side of things, because you do have a resource on there. So maybe you could just remind us. And you've released an updated resource recently.
Yeah, there was good news last week. We've been working on it for quite a while, because the 32 diamond drill holes that were done in 2011 were never incorporated into the current model. So our competent person literally built the model from scratch with today's technology. For example, I don't want to get too technical, but the old resource was based on SERPAC. The new one is on Leapfrog, which is the way to go when you want to model these things. So that's up-to-date, geological modeling software. So we've been able to much more precisely define the various layers of the uranium, because the uranium also has various layers, which has a benefit in terms of understanding geometallurgically as well, by the way. So it took a lot longer, but now we're really confident because we understand it that much better. The end result was the resource that was predominantly indicated, more than 90% has converted to measured. Brilliant. So huge, very high level of confidence. But then also most of the remainder is now in the indicated, and we've grown the resource as well. So it's gone from, in round figures, 40 million pounds to just over 50 million pounds. The high grade zone its grade has gone up to 480 ppm. So we've got around about 20 million pounds of uranium at 480 ppm. When it comes to mining, we've done some high-level pit optimization exercises. But what wasn't taken into account at the time is we now know that there's a beneficiation step to be had, where you can get rid of possibly 30% of the feed, the hard stuff, the low-grade stuff. Which has two benefits, or three. You increase the grade of what you feed into the plant, so that's the obvious one. Second, you dramatically reduce the power consumption of what's going in the plant because you've taken up away the hard stuff. And third, you also reduce the reagent consumption because you'd use a lot of acid trying to get the uranium out of the rhyolites and the basalts. So that's the prize in the next step of our metallurgical test work, is demonstrating how and what the recoveries are. So it's a really exciting deposit. If you define it purely on the basis of measured and indicated, it is, and I choose my words carefully, it's the largest mineable deposit in the US, uranium deposit in the US. There is one that's much, much bigger than ours, but it's in Virginia, which has a moratorium on uranium. Right. Much like the challenges we face in WA and Queensland, totally unnecessarily, I might add.
What next work needs to happen on the uranium side here? Can we expect, you're saying you're looking at some rudimentary mine plans already.
Yeah.
When can we expect an actual mine plan, some economics around this?
What we need to know is what will happen once we've removed that hard stuff. And that's a question that remains unanswered. Metallurgical test work that was done in 2013 didn't have the time to take the next step. So hopefully we've generated sufficient core to at least get some insight into that, which provides a feedback loop back into the cost structures we use to run the pit optimization exercises. And we haven't identified a lab as of yet to do that test work. We've only just got the call. We haven't even assayed it yet. And we were also in a newer zone, a small extension to the uranium deposit. We're not interested in extending it today. That's a problem for another day. But it means that, it's not, you couldn't say, oh, well, it's a representative sample of the whole ore body. But it would be sufficient to inform what we need to do. Purely in uranium terms, the next phase is drilling or even a bulk sample to do the level of test work that's required that would drive a DFS as opposed to PFS. But we would still like to do a PFS. We're not going to skip that step. So it's scoping study, PFS, DFS. But the first two steps can happen very quickly because the uranium is so well defined.
Well, especially with such a large measured resource, surely scoping study not too expensive. We could at least get some ideas
very cost
around the economics. Like you were saying at the beginning there, some of your investors are talking to you about, well, perhaps lithium's the real prize here. You've got Thacker Pass nearby and other projects that have a substantially larger market capitalization. How do you incorporate these two assets? You're saying that they're not connected in terms of
geologically.
So
very easy to mine one and not the other.
Right. Yeah. So what realistically is the main focus now? So you focus on building up this lithium resource whilst also doing the studies on the uranium?
We have the resources to do both. I'd like a few more resources. give me a little bit more sleep. Sure. And my teammates as well. So it's not just me at it. I mean, I've got some wonderful people that are putting in the hours. And it's a fair criticism from some of our shareholders saying, but the lithium provides all this blue sky. And I agree with them and I acknowledge that. Something that has hindered us to a degree is getting au fait with the way things are done in Oregon today compared to as they were 10 years ago, when the company and my colleagues who were there at the time previously permitted a project or a drilling program. What's different from Oregon to Nevada is in Nevada you permit a program with the BLM if you're on Bureau of Land Management land, and then you go and drill. In Oregon, you've got to go to the State Department as a second step. And whilst we've permitted all our holes for the remainder of the program with the BLM, in fact, the follow-up took us 2 weeks. Okay, done and dusted. Absolute pleasure. Dagami, as the state agency is known, takes a lot longer. And they consult with state and federal bodies. And so our first program took 3 months to permit on 1 square mile, 640 acres. Because the BLM says your project area is your project area. Dagami says 1 square mile at a time. Wow. So I have 5 applications on my computer, draft applications, that will be submitted within the next 2 weeks. It's not going to take 3 months to get those permits, because now we know the lay of the land and we've got guidance with all that feedback we had in the first process. So we'll have that early next year, even coming over Christmas, but we'll get it by the end of January. There is a winter moratorium on drilling, so it's not going to impede us from drilling, but we'll get that permit and then we'll continue. And that is focused on lithium step out, as well as then generating more core for the next phase of metallurgical test work. So we're treating them both equally. And I'm talking to a number of strategic investors, and not just funds, but operating entities as well. And a number of them have remarked, you need to be aware that the lithium could ultimately dwarf the uranium. And that's possible, quite possible.
That wouldn't be a bad thing though, would it? If the lithium resource got to a size where it dwarfed the...
I'm not going to complain, not at all. No. If we also happen to have 1 billion tons of economic lithium, bring it on.
Yeah, no, completely agree with that.
And as I said, you can elect to see the overburden above the uranium as waste. You would mine it and stockpile it, and all you're doing is you're stockpiling lithium. And reclaiming from stockpile is cost effective, cheap and easy. And then you mine the uranium. Or, because the lithium on top of the uranium is the least attractive part of what we believe the lithium resource will ultimately look like, we could focus on mining the 200 meter beds. And when you look at that analog compared to, or you use Thacker Pass or Jindalee sections as analogs to what we know about the geology, they are 200 meter thick sediments.
So Thacker Pass and the other company, they have the exact same type of structure in terms of it's clay hosted lithium.
Yep.
It's all very relative and similar. So if you were to find a similar deposit in scale, what's the difference in terms of license boundaries that, say, Thacker Pass and the other company have? Are their licenses a lot larger than yours?
No, so I can't remember off the top of my head what Thacker Pass is. I have looked at it, obviously, but I can't quite recall. But Jindalee's current 1.3 billion ton resource is 25 square kilometers.
Okay.
And our current focus area is about 18 square kilometers. But then we've got the next 20 square kilometers joining us and them.
Okay.
But we're focusing on this particular area.
I know you need to find a lithium resource of size first, but say you do find that. You spoke about permitting for the exploration side there, but permitting a mine in Oregon, I don't know a lot about it. Perhaps you can run us through it.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Once again, Oregon is somewhat unique, and in the lead up to the listing, a number of people said, Oregon's not a mining state. And that's a fair comment and a fair observation. Fortunately, most of my colleagues have extensive experience in the US. And I'm a newbie when it comes to the US. But they already had a clear plan in mind. And because we are the closest of those 3 projects, and let's lump us all in the same boat, we're the closest to established infrastructure. Yes, Thacker Pass is already in Nevada, so they have an advantage, but we are the closest to Nevada compared to us and Jindalee. Mm-hmm. So we're close to infrastructure, and they said, well, what we need to do is we need to look for an environmentally suitable and acceptable location just inside Nevada that is suitable for plant and tailings. Okay. So our very first trip over there, immediately after the IPO, apart from engaging with the local community, which is kind of top of the list. The second step was doing a scouting trip. So we are clearing holes with the BLM for the drilling program, cultural heritage surveys, and then we were looking for suitable locations. But because, and I really acknowledge this, my colleagues have maintained connections with the community, even though we weren't active there, we were approached by one of the farmers wanting to sell a private property. So we're like, wow, okay. We didn't hesitate. So we bought a 410-acre private property on the border inside Nevada. Our objective, our aim, is we permit what is in effect a quarry in Oregon, which is a fairly straightforward process. You've got to go through all the rigmarole, so there's nothing wrong with that. That's as you expect and as you must do. But then you would send your ore into Nevada, and you'd permit your plant and tailings in one of the world's most leading mining jurisdictions.
Interesting.
And so we have done that already. So we already can envisage a project delivery path. And when I mentioned infrastructure, one of the crucial parts to that puzzle is we have hydroelectricity power lines coming across that property with a substation just on the edge of the property. 6.5 US cents per kilowatt hour. I don't know an MD anywhere in the world that wouldn't rip your arm off for that sort of energy cost. And it's clean. Brilliant. So now we don't have to truck stuff. We can crush it and pipe it. We can crush it and convey it. We have options. Clean, emissions-free options. So we can picture this, and I hate to say it because it's a bit of a hackneyed phrase, but this mine of the future picture. But it genuinely is. So it's fantastic.
I almost don't want to go back to it, but I do. It's with the lithium side, because we have touched on lithium quite a bit.
Yeah.
What confidence do you have that the mineralogy will be similar to your neighbours? Have you done any hand samples of the lithium?
We've done the assays, but the key component to unlocking the economics of lithium in that part of the world is understanding the clay. You get geologists and then you get clay mineralogists, and they're in a totally different league. They're a very complex science. The reality is, Chevron drilled out Thacker Pass in the 1980s, and the USBM did bucket loads of test work with publicly available reported information now on how to treat clay-hosted lithium. It wasn't economic then, because lithium was probably 1/100th of the price, if not even less then compared to what it is today. Then you've got Thacker Pass that has been working on it and also has done a different process route for the last 12 years. And then you've got locally, as in locally London listed, Aurora, that did all the work on Sonoma in Mexico, another clay hoster, 4 years of pilot plant test work, to the level that it gave Ganfeng, one of the world's largest, if not the largest, lithium players, the confidence to acquire the asset, and they're now developing it. And then Jindalee is well advanced with their metallurgical test work too, and I've been watching them with interest because they are smartly keeping all their options open. So they're acknowledging the Sonoma flowsheet route, which was similar to USBM's conclusions, sulfidation, roast, and a water leach. Whereas Thacker Pass has migrated from that to a beneficiation step with a sulfuric acid leach. And Jindalee, from public reporting, is assessing both of those as they need to do. So our first step is let's get an understanding of the clay mineralogy and then try and benchmark that against what Thacker Pass has and what Jindalee has.
Do you think, so you're in this 18 square kilometre
zone
area that you're looking for lithium hosted clay. So say you do find it, it would be a pretty major discovery. Do you think your neighbours in the region, obviously they're a bit bigger than you now, do you think you might be a takeover target, or do you not ever want to go down that route until you sort of build this up?
Our focus and what we're good at is developing a clear strategy that is a deliverable strategy to build a mine in uranium and in lithium. If something happens along the way that's out of our control and you deal with that at the time, I think Thacker Pass probably wouldn't find us particularly attractive because they are already that big. Jindalee may find us attractive because of our infrastructure advantages, but I don't know. And then there are other players that realize, and these are not my words, I'm quoting somebody else, McDermott Caldera could be the largest lithium resource in the world. It is the largest lithium resource in the USA. So I'm quoting somebody else with that. And I genuinely don't know. That's interesting. So the possibilities of attracting somebody who gets it, that if the US wants a reliable, large domestic supply of lithium, that's where to go.
Over the next 12 months, what do we really need to be looking out for? What are the main catalysts? What work are you going to be doing that's going to be delivering value to shareholders?
So immediately, to keep my shareholders happy, a definition of step one, an exploration target with the lithium, and step two, a maiden lithium resource. Because immediately that'll say, right, now we've got something we can value. So that is a priority. It's then understanding the clay. So it's those initial site tests. So you get the best minds in the world working on the components that you've got, and then starting those initial, call them CITA metallurgical tests, to see whether what is publicly known we can borrow, steal, learn from, and apply it to our own resource. So that's the lithium focus. And that's all predicated on definitely within the next 12 months. We were hoping for a lithium resource by the middle of next year, and it may or may not happen. It just depends on how quickly and how successful the drilling is, the step-out drilling. On the uranium side, it's almost easier to define the path because we don't necessarily have to go back and drill, although we need to pull out the metallurgical sample. But from a resource, it's defined, and we don't need to go any bigger to demonstrate its economics. We just need to understand the metallurgy. With the core we've got, obviously, people will be seeing the assay results from this current drill program, both in terms of uranium and lithium over the next 2 months, because that's how long it takes with the current backlog of assays in labs all over the world. So consistently see that flow of results. You'll see us permit the remainder of the uranium and lithium drilling programs. We'll be shortly reporting on the results of a full review of the historical metallurgical test work, and we'll be highlighting this opportunity that we have to beneficiate, because it's a major advantage. So that's something to really look forward to. And then try to complete sufficient test work as soon as possible on the uranium to do that scoping study. Because as you rightly said, it won't be expensive. And so we're fully funded to do that sort of stuff quite easily. And then we'll take advice on whether we have sufficient information to step that up immediately into a PFS, because once again, it's not a lot of work. If the tailwinds work in our favor in terms of the metallurgical results, we could quite easily do a PFS by the middle of next year. Right. If we still need to do more metallurgical test work, it may take a bit longer. So that's kind of the steps forward. It's lithium exploration target, resource, and it's metallurgical test work, scoping study, and PFS on the uranium side. So there's certainly plenty to keep us busy and keep us engaged, but keep the market engaged with the news flow as well.
Well, this is what I love about this, is that you can essentially, it's two deposits on top of each other, but you can treat them as individual ore bodies. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
Greg?
And our lithium won't glow in the dark.
True. But Greg, thank you for your time.
Peter, thanks so much. Nice to catch up with you once again, and great to share the story.